Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Information Playground. You're joining us today, coming to you from WVLP. That's WVLP.org. If you're in Northwest Indiana, especially Valparaiso, you can dial it on your FM radio at 103.1, or even better, any place in the world, you can stream it from WVLP.org. They're a great radio station for the community. They do a lot in the community, and I hope you'll check out the website. If you'd like to underwrite our program or any of the fine programming on WVLP, you can find out how to do it there, or send an email to the great station manager, Greg Kovich, at info@wvlp.org. They'd love to hear from you. My name's Ron Bush. I own Ron Bush Consulting, and we're a cybersecurity company. We help businesses protect themselves against cyber criminals. And the Information Playground is dedicated not just to that kind of information, but it's to all kinds of new information. Just so much happening in the world. It's a job to keep up with it, and we do our best to educate our listeners and viewers. Speaking of viewers, you can listen to us on podcast, any of the podcast platforms that I'm familiar with, or YouTube. You can watch us all on the Information Playground, and it's all three words, the Information Playground. So with that, our special guest today is Mark York. He's a good friend, and this is the second time he's on the program. It's not too often you catch me where you just startle me and just amaze me with new information. But I've checked out his website, Mass Tort News. It's an excellent website. I encourage you to go there and check it out. There's all kinds of news that you may or may not have heard about. Every document that I've seen on there is well researched and well documented, though. So you can go to responsible websites to find that out. Mark, I'm getting into your introduction here, and I should let you do it. You'll do a much better job.
No, you did a good job. I'll go with that. I'm gonna have to record that and use it. Hi, my name is Mark York. I'm the editor of Mass Tort News. I've been involved in reporting and reviewing regulatory compliance and bad conduct at times. That's what the tagline is of corporate as well as governmental affairs and things like that. And it's always been common throughout history. There are bad players, good players, et cetera. And but some of these things would be considered quasi-criminal at times. Others are just bad style and form all the way around it because of the lack of disclosure to the public information. They're just not getting some of these things out, which I think anyone that's listening, about what we're possibly going to be going into detail about in a little bit, PFAS and things, but there's just many things that they need a little bit more light shine, the light upon them, but there's not a real big interest or forum for that, because some of this is not pleasant to hear to a degree, and it's just not, I refer to it as the news flavor of the day. Yeah. It just doesn't go down that road quite often, but it's out there and it's available. I put it into a much more digestible, easier to read format, but I also put in the science and the links within whatever I'm writing. It's basically a white paper that the average person more or less can grasp and understand.
And I love the way you do it. And I think you hit the nail on the head. I was going to say, I think the problem with the press is they don't do a good job of taking complex issues and reporting on them. Cybersecurity suffers from that. Mm-hmm. The last time you were on, we spoke about the opioid
yes.
problem. And now we've got this we're going to talk about today. So PFAS and PFOS, get us into that.
Okay, it goes back quite part of it began with Teflon, non-stick cookware and things. There are chemical components that were used that are binding, and they are just a unique format. And they came out of, they started as firefighting foam as far back as composites. Whenever even in the World War II films where you saw they weren't really using water, a lot of that was like a foam type agent, and there were compounds that were derivatives that came out from there that various companies started learning that it just suppressed, oxygen. There was no way for oxygen to get in there, but in order to do that, you have to have a binding, the adhesive chemical components and the ability to bind and suppress, as well as withstand heat. That's the other thing. It wasn't like you just suffocate it with water and it overwhelms it. This just like stopped it. And these chemicals became much more prevalent in many areas, in the styrofoam and food and all sorts of other things. But the one regular and ongoing use that people would have seen is in firefighting foam. It's called AFFF, Aqueous firefighting foam. Is whenever you saw it on an airplane, whenever an airplane jet fuel, because that's high intensity heat, it just can knock it down right away. And then, or marine fires where it's like a limited space and confined area, whether it's the Navy or just a regular boat or something, you will see that white foam. And at airports, it's prevalent. And I don't want to cause any high anxiety around National Guard bases and military bases, which if you recall, 1990, the early 90s, they had the base realignment. Remember all the bases that were in the north? And the Bush, the group, they all moved to the south. Well, there's legacy issues around some of the chemical and water contamination in those areas, because for years, hundreds and hundreds of years, many months and years, they used the foam to fight these fires, and often they were started on purpose for training, especially at the National Guard bases, because they were training for overseas all throughout the Vietnam War and everything. So this turned into, the reason they call it the forever chemical is once this is in you, not in the water, I mean, it's there in the water, et cetera, but once it's in your body, it binds and it doesn't go away.
So actually, when it's in the wild, I looked at your paper, of course, and I did some other research on the web. And once it's in the water, once it's in the ground, it is there to stay. Something I looked at might have been on the NBC has had a couple of things on it, though they're just little 2-minute blurbs where they talk about it, no depth on it. But one report said that I think it was DuPont, their own scientists say it might be 1 million years, which of course, if we continue to ingest this stuff, will be long after we're gone. It's in our food, it's in our water. The EPA recommends 3.4 drops, 70 parts per trillion, which equals 3.5 drops in an Olympic-sized pool. That's an incredibly small amount of chemical, and yet it's many times that in most of our water. So we cook our food, we water our plants, we feed our animals, ourselves, our pets. I mean, it virtually winds up in everywhere. And you mentioned Teflon. I can remember, I love Teflon cooking. And when, the stuff would start to wear off, I'd go buy another Teflon pan. The way I cook, I need help not to burn the stuff. And so, it was a tool for me. Now I find out the chemical they use to do that is causing cancer. I made some notes here. It's known to cause cancer.
Yes.
Reproductive issues. Can't find my notes. Oh, here it is. So it's in chemicals from, we talked about cookware, but stain-resistant clothes and carpets, firefighting foam, like you mentioned, and it's throughout industries like aerospace, automotive, construction, electronics, military, and I guess I didn't write down all the things that it can be part of. It's reproductive issues. There's cancer. I forget an awful lot of health issues that are attributed to this chemical. Oh, here it is: kidney damage, immune system problems, and of course cancer. And that's really, I think, what brought it to light was was a cancer report,
Yes.
or litigation.
Well, one of the things is there's a whole multi-district litigation on this. It's called the AFFF, multi-district firefighting foam litigation in the U.S. District Court of South Carolina, where they took all of these cases and consolidated them under this one heading. It's like a class action, but much more complicated, but it's all in one court for everything around the country. And it's primarily related to the long-term use of the triple, AFFF and firefighter cancer, but also there is a whole separate, like a second section, which are the municipalities that are surrounded, either the manufacturing facilities of where these drugs were, these chemicals were made, and the airports where the runoff went into the groundwater or the water supply. And so that's a whole other, like several states have sued. And it's getting to be a pretty big, it's expected to be the most expensive cost of settlement litigation in the United States history for remediation and just an outpay approaching $175 billion or something like that.
Wow. I think of this, I'm from Valparaiso, and I remember a couple of years back, we had a problem, especially in East Chicago. There were other areas, but East Chicago had a real problem with drinking water. Not too long after Flint, Michigan, that came to light.
Yes.
We've had issues where we found problems in our drinking water, but I don't remember hearing anything about this. And I think part of it's the complexity, like we were talking about. It just doesn't seem to get the airplay. And yet, again, looking through your article and looking through some other places, there's 8 major companies involved. 2 of them are American, DuPont and 3M. But you've got Arkema from France, Asahi from Japan. Ciba was from Switzerland. It's now owned by BASF in Germany. Clariant is Swiss. Dakin, I didn't write down where Dakin is from. I don't remember.
I believe they were at one point part of an American group.
Yeah, but I don't know where they are now. So maybe they're still an American group. Solvay is from Belgium. Solexis, I didn't get to. It's a worldwide problem. It isn't just an American problem.
One of the things that you'll notice about all of those is they all have a very, very direct link to defense industry. They're big defense contractors as well. And that correlates into why we haven't heard anything about it is a lot of the science and data and the bad conduct and the adverse events, all those things, the adverse events, military people have been getting sick from it. Career guys that have been Marine firefighters or Air Force firefighters, they notice they have very short life generally because, we're should be going 80s and 90s, it's, 60s and early 70s. Yeah. And the Department of Defense has been completely knowledgeable and aware of all the issues with this for quite a long time, but they have that Department of Defense shield. What they did to try, as word started percolating out about 15 years ago or so, they handed this off to the National Guard in each state, because what they were saying, especially in the North, because there wasn't the military presence, but what there was using a lot of these residual bases, and they said, start doing science and research on this, on finding out about PFAS issues. But the only problem is that data is not forthcoming. It's like still under the umbrella of the DOD. And there is a department, if you do a search, Department of Defense PFAS, they've got a public facing PSA type, we're the good, see what we're trying to do, but they won't give the data, the hardcore evidence-based intel to anybody that could say, all right, this is a real time, we can look at this and determine a little bit more critical criteria. That is not forthcoming. And I think I mentioned briefly before, an example is in 2017, there was a Hennepin County, Minnesota, there's a 3M plant there, and they had contaminated the water, and the Attorney General had filed a lawsuit against 3M. And a week before the trial, they wrote an $800 million check to settle that litigation. That was for one county, one single county. So that right there would explain, kind of the gravity of the situation. But, and I am somewhat aware of this from following the litigation and talking to these people, that those documents in that state court have been numerous times they've attempted to get them unsealed and they cannot. So there is science and data that was relied upon in prior litigation that they can't get the judge to provide access to the lawyers in that federal litigation that's ongoing now. And usually, after a year or two of fighting back and forth, someone says, all right, we're done fighting. Here, you can have access. That's not occurring. So that just kind of shows that the level of concealment is pretty vast and broad, that they've been trying to get those records unsealed for 2 years.
Yeah.
2 full years of court. So
it brings back shades of the fight with the tobacco industry. I think of Agent Orange in Vietnam.
Yes.
All of that, all this stuff, people know, but they won't release the data so that it can be debated in court and decided in court. And so we wind up, people die through all of this. And that's the horrible thing, the loss of life. While lawyers battle it out, people are dying every day.
Here's a way that you could pop it for anybody that's just a regular consumer. The next time you go to Walmart or any other store where they sell any nonstick, you will, if you look on that, on the little, paper wrapper or whatever it is, you will see no PFAS. It'll say no PFAS / no PFOS in this product, which there's a reason that they're doing that. And because Teflon, and the easiest correlation to understand is, you notice how Teflon, you can get as hot as you want and it's there. Well, that's PFAS because it's heat resistant and it works in heat. That's it. That's just like the animal that it is. So there's many things like that. And going back to how this really blew up was the prior multi-district litigation regarding Teflon and DuPont in Ohio and West Virginia. It was known as the C8 multi-district litigation, where some people in West Virginia and Ohio, primarily in West Virginia, started noticing that their cows were basically becoming sick and dying, and people were getting sick, but vastly sick in large regions of northern West Virginia, north central West Virginia. And then they started doing testing and they found out that West Virginia, certain parts of it, and I have an office there, great state, I like it, but that was known as Chemical Valley because they were making that's where America's chemicals were made for many, many years. And they had, it was great jobs, great pay, but that's since, changed. But I don't know if you recall, here is a perfect example. Do you recall Bhopal, India, back in the 80s, where they had the Union Carbide had the gas leak that killed like 5,000 people in the middle of the night? It just crept across this big, large city.
Yes.
That same chemical was manufactured right outside of Charleston, Indiana. I'm sorry, Charleston, West Virginia, for a fair amount of a long time, put it that way. And then they realized the dangers and they were like, no. But there were other components of various chemicals that were, that were made there. And one of the, later legacy chemicals was C8 in the Teflon. And that's what started causing all these animals and people. I mean, obviously, if the animals are getting sick from the water, so are people. And a lot of that is well water. They don't have the luxuries that the municipal people do, for basically scrubbing, and especially back then. And I mentioned to you Mark Ruffalo, the Hulk from the Marvel comics.
Right.
The movie Dark Waters is completely about that subject matter, and it was a major hit movie.
I appreciate that. I was not aware of it. I'm not a big movie watcher, and so I didn't know anything about it. I checked it out on Rotten Tomatoes, I guess it is.
Yeah.
And it looks really good. I will definitely, I don't know if I can catch it on Netflix or where, but I'm sure I can catch it somewhere.
Yeah, it's out there, and it's I even believe that there are some platforms that allow you can view it through some of the more, I guess the environmental groups. They sometimes have access to it because it kind of it shines the light on what was going on. And here, the controversy and the manipulation in corporate America. DuPont spun off the maker of this called Chemours, Chemours. They kind of set them off there with no money, basically operational expenses. And, they were self-sustainable, but, DuPont is DuPont.
Right.
And it just came out in the last 2 months that because Chemours and one other of their derivatives, all of a sudden it dawned on them that, hey, I think we were sold into the PFAS litigation by our parent corporation, DuPont. And now they're trying to say that we owe billions of dollars. Yeah. We don't have it. And so they turned around and sued DuPont, their parent corporation. They said, hey, you knew. That's what everybody was saying in the outside world, the litigation was, DuPont spun this off so they could avoid the liabilities. Right. And then finally, the subsidiaries said, now we understand why you did this, because this is coming into being. And so they just worked out like I think it was a $3 billion indemnification deal, but they had to pay their subsidiaries that they spun off a lot of money for what had already occurred. So that was absolutely, corporate boardroom decisions that someone knew back whenever Chemours was spun off, which was years and years ago. They're like, we have to get rid of this because it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
Well, but no one said anything. And, even the subsidiary until 2 years ago was like, no, that's not how it was. And yes, it was.
It amazes me how, maybe it's just Americans. I don't think so. I think it's humans as a whole. We can see this stuff and kind of just close our eyes or put blinders over so we can't look at it. As early as the 1940s, it was established there was a problem with this. As you said, the firefighting foam.
Yes.
On ships, they used it. They knew there was a problem with it. And the science has shown, one of the popular phrases now is follow the science because of the pandemic. Well, science showed that and nobody ever followed it. Or as you say, it gets locked up in litigation. The files aren't open, one thing or another, but we should know this stuff.
Well, the military, it all rests at the feet of the military. I can tell you the military doesn't just casually sit around a board, their barracks with generals and Air Force people, and everyone say, hey, let's put up a website about this PFAS and that it might be dangerous. And we're going to have these guys. No, it was like, we have to be somewhat transparent, not completely, because then we'd really be in trouble. So, just they're offering a glimpse at it, but it's not what should be done. And the military is known forever about it, but it's just not, it's just not a good thing to be talking about. And with everything else that's been going on for the last 4 years, and I'm not saying it's anybody's fault or this or that, people were caught up in the moment of what's been going on. And now that things are kind of not so radically newsy, the news was radical for a long time. The media on both sides, but now it's getting back to like, it's never going to go back to Walter Cronkite and Dan Rather, but it'll be, things will be coming out and everybody will go back to a somewhat normal, like, all right, there's not going to be any Capitol riots or this or that, hopefully. So other things are going to, come into their own. But the litigation is, there's more and more, cities and municipalities, the water district. I can tell this is a fact. It's the New Hampshire, state of New Hampshire and the state of Massachusetts issued warnings about bottled water in their states because of PFAS contamination for pregnant women. And that's a very unique thing for a state Department of Health to say, oh, you might want to think about drinking bottled water. And why do we drink bottled water? Because well, everyone's like, whoa, regular water is not safe.
Yeah.
But now, 2 states have said it might be an issue if you're pregnant or looking to become pregnant with your bottled water because they did testing. So it's not, that's just not, they don't randomly do that just to be alarmist.
Right.
So there could be something more there, and which opens up a whole other big, not so much litigation, but a big public safety area. And you have to, my view is, let's just use East Chicago, for example, and they've made some chemicals there they still do to this day, but they seem to have a good handle on it to a degree. Up until about 1950, they were pretty reckless in how they disposed of certain things, but they've been cleaning it up for a long time, and it's they still know what they're doing there in the chemical world. But let's just say that PFAS, and I don't think PFAS was made there because there would have been litigation about it. But if there was, and East Chicago, like all these other cities and communities around the country, said they're going to file a lawsuit because our drinking water is contaminated. Well, if I'm sitting in East Chicago and my city files a lawsuit against a chemical maker that says, oh, we want $500 million because you have been contaminating our water supply, I'm going to say, well, what about me? I've been drinking the water. I don't care what's the government going to do? Make new flagpoles? Buy new police cars? I'm the one that's been drinking the water.
Yeah.
That's my view of how skewed things get.
That hit me. 2 things hit me. One is while you were talking, when I was researching this before today's program, I wondered, well, if it's everywhere, and you've got a good link there to 1,600 or not 600, 100 of the worst military water sites in the country. Very educational. I appreciated that. But as I read through this, it seems to be everywhere. It was something someone estimated 1,500 drinking water systems across the U.S. may have been contaminated, affecting 110 million Americans. That's a third of us.
Yeah.
As I kept reading, I began to wonder if it wasn't a lot worse than that. Well, where are we getting our bottled water? Are we getting it from places that are contaminated there? Because something else I read said you can't scrub it. You can't, osmosis doesn't get rid of it.
Right.
The stuff that we buy for our homes water filtration doesn't filter it out. So is it in the bottled water? And the other thought I had, you just touched on, is with all the money the government gets paid with all these, whether it's the tobacco company or it's the chemical companies, why do we have a debt at all? My gosh, I'm just amazed. And like you said, so I'm glad the government offset my taxes a little bit, but I'm going to die because of the stuff they didn't take care of.
Sure.
They're not going to get any more of my taxes. I'll be in the ground, which is probably more contaminated. It just never seems to end, does it?
No. Well, one of the things is that number, I think I would just want to make sure, I think it's like 3.4 parts per trillion,
Yeah.
Okay.
It's 70 parts per trillion,
Yes.
which equals 3.5 drops in an Olympic-sized pool.
The actual industry science standard among the peer-to-peer is it should be half of that. That's what that's the EPA standards. They've been trying to lower it for a long time. And it's just something that's not going to happen because there's a machine in Washington, D.C. that they have to, not protect the self-interest, but there are certain things that are just kind of, don't give away the keys to the castle. Right. And a good comparison and analogy is the Roundup litigation with Monsanto and Bayer. Is for years and years and years, it's been a known thing that Roundup exposure, primarily in landscaping and workplace applications, causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. There's just a huge number, disparate number people with non-NHL that worked in the landscaping industry versus regular people. But then there's people that were using it for 25 years that just spraying it everywhere. And so they try to get the standards lower, raise the standards, lower the amount in the Roundup was permitted. And there was a very, very formal, focused effort where they, the companies paid doctors, scientists, and consumer groups to frame papers, write papers, and then push them out into the back office of the science publications and things to make them filter up so it appeared as if they were legitimately placed science applications. It says it's completely safe. It's completely safe. Well, they got access to all of these, a firm called Baum Hedlund in California, and that's where those huge verdicts, because they found the emails from the EPA, like the number 3 person in the science of the EPA group, that said, don't worry, we are going to endorse your science paper from Joe Smith over there at the University of Tuscaloosa, who is, up until 6 months ago was a, dental affairs scientist, but now he's a chemical affairs scientist. And they would embrace that and move it. And the person that really pushed this forward on Roundup, the minute it got so bad, he had to resign from the EPA about 2 years ago. The minute it was contrived, but he got like a $300,000 a year job, which is much more than he made with the EPA as a consultant to Monsanto. Walked out the door, and his name is all over these documents. If you, for anybody that really wants to look at this in yourself, go to Baum Hedlund, BAUMHEDLUND, and then just look at their Roundup repository, and you will see the actual live documents that came out that state everything was suppressed and science was manipulated by design by some of the chemical associations were even involved.
Jeez.
But money does that.
Yeah. Let's talk more about that when we come back. I don't know if I really want to talk more about it or not. It's kind of depressing. But anyway, we need to, because we're informing folks and we need to take a pause. I want to thank everyone for listening to us or watching us today. If you're listening to us on WVLP, thank you for being a part of the radio community that serves Valparaiso. If you'd like to get involved in the community and in what WVLP does, check them out at wvlp.org. While you're at it, you can listen to us or watch us on demand. I might mention on WVLP, we're broadcast at 8 a.m. On Mondays and at 1 p.m. on Fridays. You can catch us on demand, however, on any of the podcast platforms or YouTube under The Information Playground. And I'm Ron Bush with Ron Bush Consulting. Check out my website. We serve the business community in cybersecurity consultancy. You can email me, Ron at ronbushconsulting.com. Mark, how do folks get a hold of you if they want more information, and tell them where to go for this article and many other fine articles?
Hey, Mark, the best way is Mark at Mass Tort News, MassTortnews.org. And that's the domain. And you can go to MassTortNews.org. Just simple, straightforward, and everything is there. There's repositories. We have articles there by attorneys about some of these subject matters and other things, but that's generally the easiest way. And I'll respond to anybody about anything. There's no exclusion at all. Anyway.
Great. Yeah, we might, just since we're on the subject, mass torts. We've heard of class action suits. Not everyone's heard of mass torts. Give a little definition, if you would, for folks.
Right. Mass torts are primarily where they were prefaced around usually pharmaceutical or medical device litigation and certain other types of actions. Like I'm sure everyone's heard of the Zantac litigation about the drug Zantac. That's a mass tort. They are framed under what's called multi-district litigation, which is like a separate standalone court that determines if there are enough common interests and common causes of an action from numerous federal or state districts around the country. They kind of, it's like a large, it's 5 or 7 judge panel, like a Supreme Court almost, but it's multi-district litigation, where they hear the plaintiffs and the defense in the hearing to determine if an MDL should be created. And then they say, all right, it's going to be an MDL and we are going to assign it to Judge X in one state. So what it does is turns the United States like into a single court. Everyone can file into their local federal courts and it just all filters over there, or they have give everyone the ability to take everything right there into that assigned court. And that's where, and then they pick like there could be 20,000 cases and they'll pick 5 bellwethers for trials. And that's the mass part. The 19,995 cases just travel along in the process, where those 5 cases are like, they're bellwethers, and that kind of defines what was going on. A good example is Vioxx, the drug that was, I believe it was Merck a few years ago, that they came out, they found out that, Merck knew that was causing heart attacks forever. They knew from the clinical trial days. So they, after 2.5 years in trials and things, they wrote like a $5 billion check. They just said, all right, here's the check. This is done. Now, if you had a Vioxx problem after that date, I have no idea what could have happened. But that's the format that's followed, and it's talc, Johnson & Johnson talcum powder. That's a major issue. I don't know who has noticed that talc's been pulled from the shelves by Johnson & Johnson.
Yeah.
That didn't, that was a huge moneymaker. That did not happen because they just didn't like the product anymore. It was because not only the science, but the manipulation of data for 20 years has come out into the open through the litigation, and where it shows that they were manipulating things with the EPA and FDA and others, the science, where they were using back office operations, because things are much more transparent just in the last 2 or 3 years. I'd say in the last 2 years, things you just can't hide, because data is always, well, you would know this, data is there. Everything that was stored on somewhere or something is all going to come out. And now it's very expensive, and artificial intelligence has enabled these MDLs to, it used to be, oh my gosh, there's 400 million pages of data, documents there. That'll take us 5 years to do it. Now, with artificial intelligence, they can put in their keywords and blaze right through that. And these, mass torts, they started, holding people more accountable. They're pretty prevalent, but now a lot of the ability to do that is going away because there's warnings. Have you noticed in the last 1.5 to 2 years, a drug commercial, 50% is adverse events, like you take something for an earache and it might make your toenail, they'll say all these bad things can happen.
Yeah.
That's the end result is, the warning, they're making warnings catastrophic. So, and doctors are, and this is the thing, the reason these are manufactured, these are usually like failure to warn or product liability things. It's because the doctors are never held at fault or liable for these prescriptions or anything, because the representative of the drug company comes in and says, hey, here's the new drug from company X. It cures everything that ails you, and it does it quickly. And the doctor's going to say, all right, you're from the company. FDA says, I can rely on what you tell me. I'm going to start writing prescriptions. Then the company representative says, oh, here's a dozen donuts.
Yeah.
Right. Things like that. It's very, very odd how some of these marketing things came into being. One of the issues with those is called off-label marketing, where they write prescriptions. They determine that a prescription is usable for another reason than it was originally, clinically prescribed for, and they start writing prescriptions for it. And it can cause adverse events. I'm not going to go into, there's so many examples of it out there. And generally they'll, if the FDA, if the Department of Justice indicts, or they cause them to enter a consent decree, they'll write a couple $2 billion check and they'll go back and they say, we won't do it anymore. And no one's held accountable really, and cost of doing business.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's a very unique world, actually.
Yeah. You know, there was a comic strip when I was a boy called Pogo. And I think the most popular strip, I don't remember where, if it was towards the end of it or not, but the character Pogo stands up, and as I recall, he has a helmet on. He's in the swamp or something. And he says, "We have found the enemy, and it is us." So often in life, I find that coming back to me. I mean, these people are human beings just like we are. They have
Yeah.
children that they want to live just like we do.
Mhm.
And yet they do this stuff over and over and over.
Yeah.
It's hard for
It's
me to
Well,
understand.
often it's incentivized, it's monetized because of the bonus structure in that industry, in the pharmaceutical. If the more a drug makes, the more it goes down the food chain, down to the sales rep, and the more money everybody makes. I mean, at one point there were a few people I'm not picking on Purdue Pharma and OxyContin, sales representatives that had a base salary of $40,000 to $50,000 a year. In bonuses, were making $400,000 a year. That's a lot of narcotics being sold in
Yeah.
order to turn that around, but it just shows the gravity of what was happening. And I think, there have been bad people all along, real criminals in this, but for a long time, people never looked at the corporations like, oh, they're doing something bad. But I think I mentioned before that in the opioids that, the test run for OxyContin as to how to turn that into a major blockbuster drug was Valium for Hoffman LaRoche, where the Sackler brothers were hired and they figured out this secret sauce to getting it out there and going right to the doctors and saying, this is what you use. And that's just repeated over and over and over again in all of these areas. And there's supposed to be, corporate due diligence and self-reporting of, things. And a lot of times those are overlooked, but that's whenever they are found, it's corporate oversight and corporate governance.
Mhm.
And they have departments. Every major corporation in America of more than 500 employees has a corporate governance side, and especially the pharmaceutical companies.
Right.
And those are like the last stop measure to internally catch something. And those obviously were not in effect in a lot of places because they would have seen these things.
Yeah.
But and the FDA is just a reporting mechanism for adverse events for drugs and medical devices. And it's coming out that there's a whole lot more adverse events that were reported by medical professionals than the FDA was letting out into the common front-facing. It's called an adverse event reporting system.
Hmm.
And so that's there at it's there, but for some reason they were hiding quite a bit of, especially for certain drugs. It's all coming out now more and more.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, so I'm still bothered by the opioid stuff that we talked about last time. I guess this will crowd some of that out of my nightmares now and take me to the water. What can we do?
Well,
What
there's
can we do?
nothing. There's nothing that can be done unless, there's really not a lot that could be done because this is a confirmed chemical component in other. It's here. It's called the forever chemical,
Yeah.
and they're trying. Certain people are going to monetize it. And they're going to say, "Well, pay us." City X. Let's just say East Chicago can say we want $500 million.
Mhm.
What are they going to do retroactively for the people that drank contaminated water? And I'm not saying East Chicago has contaminated water in any way.
That was just an example.
But it just as an example. So even if they get money, what are they going to do with it? I mean, they can say, all right, we'll put ultra sophisticated scrubbers that'll minimize it down to below the EPA standards, which you always have the other group that says, well, it should be 50% lower than what it is. And even if they got it to that, you don't have a historical way to fix what's already there.
Yeah.
And nobody knows, I mean, where to go. Michigan, that water, Michigan is, 40% water, I think, or something with all the lakes and streams, it's there. But I imagine it's, in every, all over the place, but we just don't know. I'm not sophisticated enough in this area to say, oh, there's going to be a resolution if even if the money comes, I don't know what they could do with it to fix it.
Yeah.
Yes. And,
Maybe this is a call to our listeners and viewers to contact your congresspeople, your folks, your representatives, your senators, and see what they can do about it. Admittedly, there's nothing, I mean, a lot of the damage is done. When you're dead, you're dead. There's nothing you can do about it.
right.
And if you've got cancer, hopefully other parts of medical technology can help you through that. But we can at least clean things up for the future. I mean, we've got children. I mean, babies are being born every day. They're born into this. I think about, I think it was Frank Zapansky back in the East Chicago water stuff was saying that, people take shower in this stuff. And of course the skin's the biggest organ in the body. People shower in this, they get the stuff on them. They breathe it while they're showering. If you take a hot shower, you get steam up, you're breathing it. It's, water is the fluid of life. We have to have it to exist.
Yes.
So if we've poisoned our own water, we've got to fix it somehow. Sometimes there just isn't anything you can do about the present or the past, but you can work towards the future. And I think that's the only answer that we've got.
Yeah, I think, the fact that this, for 50 years, let's just use that number, 50 years, this has been a known, certified science risk under discussion among people and places and things that they've just known about it. And it's just, they probably could have done a little bit more in the 70s, like, whenever DDT, as soon as they found out about it, it went away. Oh, because it was killing birds.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that in a bad way, but that was the tagline that they were able to associate with it, as well as, well, if it's doing that to them, it's doing that to us. People never understood the gravity of really what was going on back there because they didn't have access to the information.
Right.
And we were a closed loop society until as recently as 5 years ago, about what is really back behind those walls in Washington, D.C. and other places. And as I said, many of those companies, if you go look at the companies involved, they have the one common thread is they are defense contractors. They have defense contracting agreements. And yes, so.
Well, I'm glad we're having this conversation, I think.
Yeah, it's something that's there. It's just, some people can put on the blinders and say, well, I'd rather not know.
Yeah.
And then others are like, well, it's at least it's good to know, but we rationalize things correctly.
Yeah.
But
that's the point. You can't fix a problem you don't recognize. If you don't know there is a problem or admit there's a problem, you can't begin to figure out the problem. And
inaction.
Yeah.
That's what but if you remember, you mentioned the Flint water, Michigan crisis.
Right.
Flint, Michigan water crisis. Well, the governor was just criminally charged just 2 or 3 months ago. He was criminally charged in that action, as were some others, because for, a year or more, they were saying there are catastrophic levels of lead in our water, and people in the mayors, everyone, they were ignoring it and they were not letting it get out into a public format. And then the lawyers came in and took over. But the health, the bad conduct and the health effects there are going to be amazingly long lasting. And there is a person that is a friend of mine. I mentioned Dr. Raul Gupta, who was recently part of the Biden transition team. He was a commissioner of a county in West Virginia. There was some kind of a chemical leak. And as the commissioner of health for this county, they did water testing regularly, and he noticed there was a spike of this certain chemical. And as I mentioned, Chemical Valley, he was savvy enough to understand that something was going on. And whenever these continued for 3 days, he started what they call kites, sending a kite up to state and kept doing it. And they were like, oh, it's nothing. It's, this is West Virginia, it's normal. And
Yeah.
he's like, no, this is not normal. This is a bad chemical. And then he sent it to some commissioners and others, Commissioner of Health and like the DHHS and some really high level people. And it was ignored. And they were like, oh, don't worry about it. He had the authority. He went in and shut down the capital of West Virginia, Charleston, West Virginia, and the region's water supply. It was that bad. He just completely shut it off. And for, I think, 20 days, they were on very limited water and ability. And then it all came out, what had occurred. And everyone was like, this person was telling you, and that's what his job is.
Mm-hmm.
And you ignored it. And the commissioner of health, who really had the final say and was terminated. And then the governor turns around and says, Dr. Gupta, would you like a job as a commissioner of health? Because we want someone like you looking out for the best interests of our state. That was one of the clearest examples of a bad situation was made much better by just a simple, smart politician doing something like immediately.
Right.
So those things happen. And, and that same Dr. Gupta was the commissioner of health during the C8 DuPont MDL multi-district litigation that the movie Dark Waters is part of. So there was, a common theme kind of going there. It went from the state issue to a big federal case.
Every generation, every time always needs people of courage. We always do. There's never too many. I'll put it that way.
Right.
And Dr. Gupta sounds like one of those people. I hope there's more. I hope that we can get people involved in talking about this, in recognizing what it is, and getting some action on it. I mean, you and I don't have any political clout, or at least I don't.
No,
maybe people will listen to us. We need people who are afraid, not afraid to step up, not afraid to voice their opinions. I mean, I know there's a lot of money at stake. There always is in this stuff, especially when you get the Department of Defense involved, government contracting, chemicals, period. Anytime you get all of that involved, but you can't spend money when you're dead.
Yes.
There's just a point where you've got to say money isn't important. Life and doing the right thing, those things are important.
Well, I mean, I don't want to bring up anything political because, I try to go right down the middle of the road, but I honestly think that an example that the politicians are still paying somewhat of some attention to is what happened in Georgia with those 2 Senate races that were late. Mm-hmm. And everyone, if I was betting, honestly, I would have bet that Georgia was going to stay Republican and everything would have been the way it was. But the people realized that, hey, we have an opportunity to do something. And there was a lot of roadblocks to get in. And then the 2 Democrats won in that state, which, a year ago, people would have, I mean, the residents of Georgia would have been like, well, we're not going to mess with it. This is, those guys are in control. So if things like that start taking hold and moving forward, it will be something that is, that can just get grassroots support. Another perfect example, this is way offside. Do you remember the Black Lives Matters, the marches in Washington, D.C.?
Sure.
March, end of May and June 1st. That included the day where the military helicopters in the Lafayette Park and the president came over with the Bible with the church. Well, Kimberly, we were there in those marches and everything. And I can tell you, there were some spray painting of some statues, but no monuments were ever defaced in anywhere. They targeted CVS drugstores for some reason. I don't know why that was, because there were Walgreens and others, but CVS, people just didn't like that. But generally, by and large, what I noticed after the first couple of days, it was kind of everyone rowdy a bit, but there was no violence and things like that. And they painted the Black Lives Matter. And then the next thing you know, it was more like a farmer's market where they put up the little pop-up tents alongside that Pennsylvania, the road there. And people started, there was music playing, and we were there every day. And I don't want to take too much time, but then I started noticing as it got towards the weekend, the people that were coming there, these were not radicals or anything. These were people from Maryland and Virginia with families. And the majority of them were not minorities. I would say 70% easily were what you would be called Caucasian or Hispanic families with kids and strollers. So it turned into just a thing where everyone was coming in to show their support. And then by the time you looked at it on the media and with the helicopters, it looked like, oh my gosh, those people, there's all kinds of radical stuff going. And it was nothing like that because I'm not a radical in any way, but I was there and I was walking around in the middle of it. So
I've heard people say that not just about the Black Lives Matter, but other things. The riot at the Capitol, I remember hearing people saying that away from it, same kind of things. People were having picnics. They had their kids. It was a great day. Were they, I guess, Trump supporters, or were they there to make a peaceful protest? Yeah, but you got to remember, at the end of the day, the press is all about ratings. It's always been about advertising. You go back to the newspaper, it was about advertising back in the in the 1800s.
Yes.
So I guess we shouldn't expect much more. We'd all like, level reporting, honest reporting, where you look at both sides or all sides. But it's the sensational that makes people tune in. And when people tune in, that's what makes advertisers pay more money. Companies pay more money. We're back to that greed business where, it's the money that makes it go.
Whenever Disney bought ABC and ABC News, that's whenever I realized, well, maybe things are just a little, and I'm not saying Disney specifically, but any of the media, because Universal Studios, I think it was Universal NBC. I think that's, whenever the entertainment arm owns what would be considered the news arm, there's going to be those high level decisions are going to be impacted by the entertainment side. They're going to be like, oh, PFAS, no, we don't want to hear about that.
Right.
We want to hear about candy apples or something.
Well, I'd actually like to continue this conversation, but we are just about out of time. So I want to ask you, if you would, let people again talk about Mass Tort News, how people can reach you, and then I'll close this.
Sure. It's Mark at Mass Tort News, just Mark, M-A-R-K at MASSTORTNEWS.org. And our site is just masstortnews.org. And we are, it's there, free to, review. You can even subscribe. Actually, there's a button there you can subscribe to get notices whenever new releases and media is put out. And actually, Ron Bush authored something, it was a white paper. I consider it definitely a white paper on the data breach with some law firms and some outside vendors that really had could have a long-term effect on how things are viewed around Washington, D.C. about cybersecurity issues. And that was posted yesterday. So Mass Tort News, Ron Bush, and it'll pop up.
Great. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Yes, sure.
And it's a pleasure to be involved. I love your publication. You're the editor in chief, and I love what you're doing, and glad to be a part of it.
Sure.
So thank you for being with us today. Again, we come to you in a number of ways. On WVLP, it's Monday mornings from 8 to 9. On Friday afternoons, it's 1 to 2, and of course, that's Central Time. You can catch us on demand on any of the podcast platforms, Apple, Google, Spotify, or you can catch us on demand on YouTube, all under The Information Playground. I'm Ron Bush. I'm owner of Ron Bush Consulting Incorporated. We're a cybersecurity company, and it's a pleasure being with you. I hope you stay safe and stay healthy, and join us next time.